do you guys have birdie goals or anything when you go into it for the day? Or like, I know you're not trying to set a score goal, but are you trying to, not, I don't want to say chase birdies, but hey, I'd love to make 4 or 5 birdies because statistically you're going to make a couple bogeys, or what's that look like for you guys?
Yeah, not really. It's the belief that if we just pick good targets,
Hmm.
just kind of through the natural cadence of a round, there's going to be scoring opportunities, right? There's going to be par fives where we've got flip wedge in or get greenside and two in. And then from
Hmm.
there, it's just about like she's honed these greenside skills to get up and down, right? From there, it's really not much that I can do as caddy aside
Hmm.
from, I always like to bring awareness if it's for instance, like 12-foot birdie putt and just remind them it's like the key is speed here. You're not going to make this putt often and get out of that mindset of like,
Mm.
I need to convert this. This is a good look. And
Yeah.
removing that obsession of trying to intentionally make birdie. That's kind of the only role I play as caddy when I'm on the greens is to just remind them like, hey, this 40-foot putt, it's a speed drill. You know the 10% rule for your first putt performance. Stick with that. And that's like, again, it's really just meant to kind of lift the pressure off of them.
Hmm.
But to your point about like trying to set a birdie goal never happens because it's like, okay, I know we're going to have, 5 holes with call it 9 iron or less in. I would expect that we're going to have 1 to 2 good looks on those holes.
Hmm.
But those holes, particularly, it's the idea of just like, I like to call them as never bogey holes because it's like, and I write about this a bit on my Instagram. It's like fractional bogeys, right? So the holes that play over par when you make a bogey on those, you're really losing only fractions of a stroke. But when you're losing fractions of the strokes, you're going to make those up by just making a 15-foot putt later in the round or a 20-foot putt. It's when you're making a bogey on a hole that's averaging 3.8. Well, now that's 1.2 strokes lost, and you're going to have to string together a couple of very exceptional things in order to undo that.
Hmm.
And so I'm a very, very big proponent of trying to, a great one is like par fives because they generally play under par, or short par fours where you're expecting the majority of the field to have 9 iron or less in on approach. Those holes are generally going to play under par. And when
Hmm.
they play under par, those are the ones that I always say, yes, the likelihood is you're probably going to have a pretty good look at birdie, but I don't want my players on the tee box thinking this is a birdie hole. I want them thinking as this is a never bogey hole. So do everything in your power not to make bogey, because when you make a bogey here, you're losing 1+ strokes to the field. If you make par, like let's just say you've got 5 holes that are playing super easy, they're playing at a 3.8 average, and you par all 5 of them, right? You've lost 1 stroke to the field over those five, and then you go out and you make like a 40-foot putt and you basically erased all of that,
Ah,
right?
okay.
But if you
Yeah.
make one bogey on one of those holes, you've now lost 1.2 strokes, and you're gonna have to go out and make 2 8-foot putts and like a 4-foot putt in order to undo that same bogey. And so I try to get my players on those types of holes to just be like, okay, this is a never bogey hole. I don't care if you think that you should birdie it, but priority here is we're walking off with nothing worse than par.
Wow, I've never heard of that. I love that. A never bogey hole. That's a great mentality. Is that something you guys then look at like stats wise before the tournament even begins? You're like, hey, these are the 5 never bogey holes.
I try to map it out. You
Hmm.
can get a general idea after a practice round of again, like a good indicator is par fives. You just assume most of them are going to play par
Sure.
better, and then more or less any par four that's going to play with having 9 iron or less on approach is
Hmm.
a good indicator, and that kind of ties into the whole Tiger Five mentality. But
Yeah.
like I went through and I did an analysis on Scotty Scheffler, and it was something along the lines of he made about 120 bogeys last season, and on like 85 or 88% of those holes, they were all holes that played to an over par average. So if you just kind of take that concept of like fractional bogeys, well, all these bogeys that Scotty's making, he can just literally delete with a putt later in the round or a close approach shot or some, like we all
Hmm.
know it's not over the course of an 18-hole round, you're going to hit a few shots that have major strokes gained. And Scotty just needed one of those to undo most of the bogeys he made last year. And like it's something I kind of made up, so I don't really have a ton of data to support it, but it makes sense in my mind that that would be um, a key to kind of why he was so consistent because the
Hmm.
holes he's bogeying are just holes that everybody else is playing poorly. And so he's never really giving up that much when he makes his bogeys. And
Hmm.
they're all holes that he can theoretically erase with one putt later in the round or one shot.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, God, what was he hitting? Like 75% of greens too? I mean,
Yeah.
he's just, just playing video game golf. Oh man, that is fascinating. I love like three things already that I know people will immediately put in to their game. Like that's just the mentality of never aiming at the flag, the never bogey hole. Like that's fantastic. Last one I guess I just wanted to double check on was back pins too. I know statistically amateurs hit more back pins than front pins, probably because of the reasons we talked about. So with
Yeah.
back pins, are you guys looking at middle distance number then, or how close? Is it just depend on like how far back it is, or and then part two of that would be what should amateurs be doing for that?
Yeah, I think the backpin answer is largely predicated on sort of the idea of, I don't think a lot of players think of their iron shots kind of in and Scott's described it before, where it's like the Venn diagram, right? So if you
Hmm.
think about like your 7 iron and your 8 iron are always going to have some level of overlap as far as their carry distance, and then your 7 iron is going to have some overlap with your 6 irons, and like being able to visualize sort of those two different circles and identifying where which club best fits. That's just a great exercise to get into when it comes to club selection. And as it relates to kind of the back pins, yeah, back pin greens percentage is always going to be higher because the short hits end up falling on the green. And
Hmm.
like those are just going to outperform anything where you miss the green because think about when you're on the green, you get to clean the ball, the surface is predictable, and you get to like kind of go through your whole routine and again it's just like very stable, whereas you miss it anywhere along the green you can get bad lie, all sorts of bad stuff happen. You could pick up mud, anything like that that just makes the shot that's already difficult that much more challenging. And so
Hmm.
that's why a lot of people are so fearful of, like a 40-foot putt. And it's like, okay, well, if I put you greenside and then I had you hit this 40-foot putt 10 times, yeah, you might three putt it at some frequency. But it's how many times do you have to three putt it to make up for like the two times that you don't get up and down, right? And
Yeah.
that's like if I gave you 8 up and downs out of 10 from the rough, like you're a god, you're a short game god, and you're not doing that. But
Right.
but like three putts just leave such a sour taste in our mouth, and people are so afraid of them. And it's like, well, the reality is like we all get the three putt, you know? And
Unfortunately.
yeah, and that was actually like one of the to tie it back to Q school. So Q school was at Magnolia Grove in Alabama, and these greens are massive complexes, right? They're very steep ridges, just kind of your typical Robert Trent Jones course. And when I showed up, my player was like, I'm really curious to hear how you change your approach targets because the greens and the ridges.
Mm.
And I kind of told Kaylee, I was like, we're not going to change our targets at all. And she was like, what do you mean? And I said, well, at the end of the day, like, I'd rather you just be on the green and we just accept that, if we hit 80% of our greens and you three putt five-ish times on the week, that's fine. Like, that's still going to do better than us hunting little quadrants and then
Yeah.
having to scramble. And there's
Right.
still no guarantee that, like, just because we hunted this quadrant, these ridges aren't then going to influence our chip shot,
Mm.
right? And like I think it took her by surprise that I just kind of thought I was like ridge agnostic or ridge irrelevant. And so we just kind of stuck with our targets. And yeah, there over the course of the week, we certainly ended up on some spots where we were in a non-ideal ridge, right? But it's like, okay, well, we're going to work really hard on our lag putting in practice.
Mhm.
And we're just going to accept that, like, for the week, if we three putt 4 or 5 times, like once a day, it's probably good enough to get your LPGA card. But I would much rather you hit 80% of your greens and three putt 5 times than hit 60% of your greens and probably still three putt some.
Mm.
And it was interesting observing kind of through the course of the 5 competition rounds. We're playing with people who are very clearly like I hear their caddy over talking with them about like, oh, we want to avoid this ridge, very, very much including the ridge in kind of their calculus. And guess what? Like we still watched, I think it was 16 three putts over those 5 days from what would have been the 10 other women that we played with.
Mhm.
So it's like just because they're like, they're trying to avoid these ridges, they're still
Yeah.
three putting.
I think that helps people just kind of like dumb it down a little bit, because if you're trying to, like you said, find the quadrants, like we're just not that good. Like we just still have
Yeah.
shot dispersion. So yeah, you're gonna hit some three putts, but you just kind of have that mentality. I also love when you said it's 12 feet, it's a speed drill. Like I think that so many golfers just need to have that reminder. We need like a Alex on our shoulder, just be like, hey, outside 10 feet,
Yeah.
it's a speed drill. It's a speed drill.